Few figures in history have worn corruption as elegantly as Imelda Marcos. Dubbed the Steel Butterfly for her mix of charm and unyielding ambition, she somehow managed to avoid formal conviction for the staggering corruption and economic devastation that she and her husband, Ferdinand Marcos, inflicted upon the Philippines. While the majority of Filipinos struggled in grinding poverty, she was busy amassing a personal fortune so vast it could have erased the country's debt, if only it hadn't mysteriously vanished into offshore accounts, luxury real estate, and of course, an extensive wardrobe. But Imelda wasn't just a dictator's wife with a shoe addiction. She was a political survivor. Despite overwhelming evidence of plundering, power abuse, and almost comical levels of extravagance, she never spent a single night behind bars. Her talent for dodging consequences was almost as impressive as her ability to justify her actions. To this day, she remains an icon of self-delusion, utterly convinced that she acted for the common good. Of course, whether the common good meant the people of the Philippines, or just herself, is a question only history can answer. But one thing is certain, when it comes to living large, rewriting reality, and making a grand exit, few have ever done it quite like Imelda Marcos. Although born into one of Manila's most prominent families, young Imelda Romualdez quickly learned that a prestigious name doesn't pay the bills. Her early years were spent in the kind of crushing poverty that was, and remains, far too common for Filipino children. When her mother, Remedios Trinidad, married lawyer Vicente Orestes Romualdez, she not only took on a husband but also inherited 5 stepchildren from his previous marriage. As the family continued to grow, Vicente's finances did the opposite, spiraling into bankruptcy. From there, life took a turn straight out of a Zion novel. The once privileged Imelda found herself living in a garage within sight of Malacanang Palace, so close to power, yet so far from comfort. Barefoot and hungry, she roamed the streets of Manila, all while taking care of her younger siblings. At 10, her father decided that city life was a luxury they could no longer afford. He moved the family to the province of Leyte, in the town of Tacloban. Imelda threw herself into her studies, eventually earning a bachelor's degree in education. But while academics provided stability, it was her face, not her diploma, that would be her golden ticket. With striking looks and an innate talent for self-promotion, she began entering beauty pageants. By 1953, at 24, Imelda returned to Manila determined to make her mark. She entered a beauty contest and, despite finishing second, decided that losing simply wasn't part of her personal brand. She demanded, because why not, to be given a title anyway, eventually settling on Muse of Manila. Enter Ferdinand Marcos, a young, ambitious congressman with a sharp mind, grand political aspirations, and, as fate would have it, an eye for beauty. When he met Imelda in 1954, he was instantly smitten. So smitten, in fact, that within 30 minutes, before the coffee could even cool, he proposed. Imelda, never one to turn down an opportunity, said yes. And just 11 days later, they were married. A whirlwind romance, or a strategic alliance? Perhaps a bit of both. Imelda quickly became the perfect political asset when Ferdinand ran for president. 1965. She was his not-so-secret weapon, tirelessly campaigning across the country and securing him an extra million votes. When he won, she didn't just step into the role of First Lady, she practically floated into it. The barefoot girl who once gazed longingly at Malacanang Palace was now its queen, and she intended to rule in style. For the world press, the couple seemed like a fairy tale come to life. Imelda played the role of glamorous diplomat with ease, dazzling international audiences and earning comparisons to Jacqueline Kennedy. But while Jackie was known for her understated elegance, Imelda was about to take extravagance to heights that even royalty would find excessive. The Steel Butterfly had taken flight, and soon the world would witness just how high, and how absurd, her ambitions could soar. As Imelda Marcos settled into her new power, she embarked on an ambitious personal mission, making up for all those barefoot, garage-dwelling years of childhood poverty, preferably with the help of government funds. The former Muse of Manila was now the self-appointed queen of excess, throwing lavish parties, amassing jewelry, buying airlines like they were handbags, and jet-setting across the globe in unparalleled style. But life wasn't all shopping sprees and champagne toasts. Trouble brewed when Imelda discovered that Ferdinand Marcos was engaging in a very undiplomatic affair. Worse still, the affair went public in spectacular fashion, with scandalous tape transcripts and Polaroid snapshots splashed across newspaper front pages. Rather than sulking in the shadows as the humiliated First Lady, Imelda decided that if her husband was going to embarrass himself, she might as well use it to her advantage. Ever the opportunist, she subtly positioned herself as a potential presidential successor, a woman ready to take charge of the nation that had had enough of Ferdinand's indiscretions. Unfortunately for her, Ferdinand had other plans, ones that didn't involve Imelda stealing the spotlight. In 1972 he imposed martial law under the convenient excuse of a communist threat, transforming his presidency into a dictatorship and securing his grip on power indefinitely. Imelda, ever pragmatic, threw her full support behind this move. After all, with democracy out of the way, she had plenty of room to maneuver. And let's not forget the added perk: Ferdinand's little affair now came with a lifetime of guilt leverage. While he tightened his hold on the nation, she tightened hers on him. With civil liberties suspended, an anti-subversion law in place, and political dissidents conveniently locked away, or worse, the people began to murmur about a conjugal dictatorship, a term that perfectly captured the Marcos regime's till death do us part approach to absolute power. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, it was in this same year that Imelda had her first brush with mortality when an attacker slashed her with a machete at a public event. The initial adoration she had enjoyed was curdling into something much darker, and the steel butterfly was discovering that admiration, when forced, had a way of turning into resentment. Despite this growing hostility, Imelda wasted no time elevating herself within the government. As governor of Metro Manila and a member of Ferdinand's cabinet, she wielded significant influence. But where others in power might focus on, say, alleviating poverty or improving education, Imelda's grand vision was all about aesthetics. She convinced herself that what the struggling Filipino masses truly needed wasn't food or jobs, but something pretty to look at. So naturally, she poured national resources into constructing extravagant theaters, luxury hotels, and a cultural center modeled after the Lincoln Center in New York, all while the majority of her countrymen scraped by on $2 a day. Many of these buildings were erected in Manila's slums, with Imelda claiming, in all seriousness, that this was a way of improving the lives of the poor. Her self-delusion reached new heights when she boldly declared, "Here in the Philippines, we live in a paradise. There are no poor people as there are in other countries." A statement that might have been more convincing had she not been saying it from inside a gilded palace while millions struggled to afford a meal. But why let reality ruin a good spending spree? Imelda continued her relentless pursuit of luxury, blind to the growing resentment simmering across the nation. Her arrogance and detachment from reality would soon have serious consequences, but for now, she remained on a taxpayer-funded shopping extravaganza the likes of which the world had never seen. As Imelda Marcos strutted through the world's great cities, she wasn't just sightseeing, she was taking notes. Seeing the wealth, extravagance, and sophistication of global elites only fueled her desire to outshine them. Unfortunately, there was one small problem: Manila's economy wasn't quite on par with Manhattan's. But why let a pesky national budget get in the way? With her husband's enthusiastic support, she began treating the Philippine treasury like a bottomless shopping fund, funneling millions into secret Swiss bank accounts. Before long, the Marcoses weren't just a first couple, they were Forbes list rich. Imelda's spending spree took her to New York, Rome, and Copenhagen, where she splurged on private art collections featuring the works of Michelangelo and Bellini. Of course, she insisted these masterpieces were meant for the museums of the Philippines. It was just a coincidence that they looked much better hanging in her personal residences. The regime worked tirelessly to project an image of stability, broadcasting scripted speeches and images of Imelda in couture gowns to mask the rotting economy. Yet, from his prison cell and later from exile, Benigno Ninoy Aquino held on to a desperate hope. He believed that if he could just speak to the ailing Ferdinand Marcos face to face, he might convince the dictator to restore democracy before the country collapsed entirely. It was a brave, perhaps dangerously naive, ambition. On August 21, 1983, Ninoy returned to the Philippines, bringing foreign journalists along as a shield. It wasn't enough. Seconds after stepping onto the tarmac at Manila International Airport, a gunshot rang out. He was dead before he hit the ground. The assassination, captured in chaotic footage, horrified the globe and instantly transformed Ninoy from a politician into a martyr. With Ferdinand too sick to have likely pulled the trigger himself, public suspicion turned immediately to the First Lady. Imelda was known for solving problems by any means necessary, and while the true mastermind remains a subject of debate, she certainly didn't mourn the loss of their greatest rival. However, if the goal was to silence the opposition, the plan backfired spectacularly. Instead of fear, the killing sparked a fire. The widow takes charge. Imelda likely expected the opposition to crumble. Instead, Ninoy's widow, Corazon Cory Aquino, rose from her grief to lead the charge. She became the reluctant but powerful face of the revolution that in a massive miscalculation, Ferdinand Marcos called for a snap election in late 1985, arrogantly believing he could validate his rule. He was wrong. Cory Aquino ran against him, and the nation rallied behind her. When the votes were counted, Marcos did what he always did, he cheated. He declared himself the winner despite rampant fraud and violence that was obvious to the entire world. But the Filipino people had reached their breaking point. Cory refused to concede, declaring herself the true president and calling for civil disobedience. The facade of the Marcos dictatorship was finally cracking. The People Power Revolution. The end came swiftly. A faction of the military rebelled, barricading themselves in a camp along EDSA, Manila's main highway. Furious, Imelda reportedly urged her husband to bomb the rebels and crush the uprising instantly. Ferdinand gave the order to mobilize. But then, a miracle occurred. Through the airwaves of Radio Veritas, the Catholic Church called on the citizens to protect the rebels. Imelda looked out from the palace windows, not at a crushing military victory, but at a sea of humanity. Hundreds of thousands of Filipinos flooded the highway. It was a revolution unlike any other. It felt less like a war zone and more like a street festival. Families shared food, music played, and people prayed. But the tension broke when the government tanks arrived. Rather than fleeing, the people stood their ground. Nuns knelt on the asphalt clutching rosaries, children offered flowers to Marines. The soldiers, faced with their own countrymen and women begging for peace, could not bring themselves to fire. One by one, they defected. The People Power Revolution had won without firing a single shot. Inside the palace, the reality set in. Even their oldest ally, the United States, advised Marcos to cut and run. On February 25, 1986, after 2 decades of rule, the family fled. They didn't leave empty-handed, of course. They crammed helicopters with crates of cash, gold, and jewels, escaping into the night. When the mob finally breached the gates of Malacanang Palace, they didn't find a government at work. They found a museum of excess. The world watched in stunned disbelief as the inventory of the Marcos lifestyle was broadcast globally. The most famous discovery, of course, was the shoes, 3,000 pairs of designer footwear lining the shelves of Imelda's massive closet. Imelda would later joke, they went looking for skeletons, but thank God, all they found were shoes. It was a clever quip, but it missed the point. The shoes were a symbol of a regime that hoarded wealth while its people starved. But it wasn't just shoes. The palace contained gallons of imported perfume, hundreds of handbags, mink coats for a tropical climate, and even bulletproof brassieres, a paranoid accessory for a woman who claimed to be loved by all. It was a slap in the face to a nation drowning in debt. Exiled to Hawaii, the family faced a barrage of lawsuits. Ferdinand died there in 1989, a bitter man who felt betrayed by the Americans. Imelda, however, was just getting started with her second act. Facing a racketeering trial in New York in 1990, she put on the performance of a lifetime. Dressed in black, clutching a rosary, and weeping on cue, she transformed herself from a tyrant's wife into a confused, grieving widow who knew nothing of the stolen millions. Against all odds, it worked. She was acquitted. On her 61st birthday, free from prison, she declared her victory a win for the little people. It was a statement of breathtaking irony from a woman who once treated the national treasury as her personal debit card. Imelda Marcos eventually returned to the Philippines, not as a pariah, but as a celebrity. She re-entered politics, reclaiming a seat at the table of power. Her story remains one of history's most confusing spectacles. From the barefoot girl in the garage to the owner of 3,000 pairs of shoes, she proved that with enough delusion and enough money, you really can rewrite history. She once famously said, "There is a little Imelda in all of us." Perhaps she was right, or perhaps that is just the final wish of a woman who never understood that the party was supposed to end.